Hello everybody and welcome to another video from our series meant to improve the way we develop software that we call Raise the Bar. I'm Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios, and what I have for you today is a short meditation on the time we spend on understanding the problems that we solve versus thinking of solutions. I first noticed this problem when I was trying to teach for the first few times developers how to do test-driven development. Test-driven development implies a level of moving back and forth between the problem domain and the solution domain that is at first hard to grasp by people who have been used with focusing a lot on solutions instead of understanding problems first. And I would have to argue that as software engineers and the software developers, what we are called to do is to figure out solutions for specific problems, and some of these solutions, but not all of them, imply writing code, imply developing software. However, some other problems can be solved without writing any line of code at all. We can bring in other types of libraries or plugins or existing software that already solves it, or we can simply solve those problems by doing some manual work or some semi-automated work and so on. So the thing that is interesting to me is that we need to learn as an industry that before we think of solutions, we need to understand the problem. And there are a few ways to train yourself to do that. The first way is to use something like behavior-driven development. The conversation part of behavior-driven development allows you to learn more about a problem by giving examples of what happens in terms of inputs and outputs, what happens for a specific problem, what are the expected outputs for specific inputs. Since we are talking about software development, this is of course something that we can do fairly easily in most cases. Of course, behavior-driven development doesn't cover all situations. There are situations where you have a mathematical formula or something like that that can do the same thing and define your problem. Well, in that case, the solution that you're trying to implement a bit better. But often what we are facing, and I think what I'm facing, is business or product level problems. Things like, let's implement a feature that does a certain thing, and we know that that feature might be useful for somebody, but we don't know how much of it will be useful, and we don't know how much of it we can implement quickly, and so on. So that's where it's very useful to understand, to learn to look at the problem and to understand the problem. Another thing that I started doing is to think of user stories not as requirements, but as problems that need to be solved. This is a very engineering type of mindset. As an engineer, you start from a problem. Let's imagine for a moment that we don't have the physics for building a bridge. We don't know how to do that. And we get a problem, build a bridge. So how would you do that? I imagine you try to split the problem into smaller problems. Like what types of materials would you want to use, which are strong materials or strong enough that we can use, what is the structure for the bridge that we can use, and so on. And for each of these we would make prototypes. So we would prototype different structures of the bridge. We would see how things are working. Can we build a bridge from wood or from stone, or and so on. And by iterating on having a fixed problem but trying different solutions and different prototypes, we would end up with a solution that best fits the problem and the constraints that we are facing. So a similar thing can be done when we talk about software products. We can start from a central question, which is how to help a certain type of user do something, and this is, let's say, our user story, but it's a question, it's a problem that needs to be solved, and then we take this problem and we split it into smaller problems, like I don't know, we make some screens, and then these screens can make solve this problem for the user, and then we prototype some kind of backend or some kind of data storage, some kinds of algorithms that we need, and so on, and we iterate on those until we end up with something that is good enough for or helpful enough for our users. So to me, in my mind, I've changed my mindset from thinking of user stories as something that, you get a product and you write down the things that you'd like for that product to be, and then you split those based on different rules. I started thinking about user stories in terms of, these are the problems, or this is the big problem, these are the smaller problems, and for each of these smaller problems we can split those even into smaller problems, and then make those problems, prototype them, iterate on them until we get to a good solution. And this would be an engineering approach to first, understanding the problem. How do we understand the problem? Well, we have to first understand the problem before we and actually through splitting a large problem into smaller problems, we start understanding the problem. And then, of course, there's a certain iteration between these two. There's a certain feedback loop. The more we work on the solution, the more we understand the problem. So it's not a cut and dry process and with a clear line of demarcation. There's always a loop between these two. And this is why it's very useful to iterate. So you take a problem, you make a prototype, and then you realize, oh, actually there's more about this. So let's go back to the problem, let's do another, let's see what else we've understood, let's imagine another type of prototype, and so on. And this is something that can help you achieve better solutions. And the third technique that I've been using is a smaller level application of this principle, which is, given a problem that is small enough that I can now start and well understood enough so that I can start developing. Now the next step is to figure out what is my first test, because I'm doing test-driven development, so then what is the first test that I need to write, what is the second test, and so on. And some of these tests will come through the interaction between, I'm writing the test, I'm writing the code, I'm writing another test, I'm writing some more code, refactoring, of course, in the meantime. And then at some point I understand more about the problem, more about the solution, so then I have other ideas about tests. But I also have a set of tests that I can write in the beginning, and that could serve me as an initial starting point. And this is something that we've been using to train people to understand test-driven development better, to understand how to how to evolve little by little. And it's a process that's very useful for beginners, but also for people who are transitioning from that thinking design up front of the solution all the way to moving incrementally. So moving between test code, and looking at the feedback from the code, from the solution on the actual problem, and what you learn from the solution related to the problem, and what you learn from the code related to the test. So these are 3 techniques that I've been using, and I think these techniques can be very useful for anybody who starts doing these kinds of transitions, transitioning to agile software development, transitioning to incremental and iterative way of working, transitioning to an engineering mindset in its true sense of, picking a problem, starting from a problem, and then figuring out solutions as you move ahead through prototyping, a very empirical approach to development in general and to software development in particular. And it's also very useful for people who want to change their mindset, or who have difficulties understanding how to do these practices that we talk about on this channel. Because it's not always easy, and always when you need to change the way you think, it's much harder. And it's useful to go through some intermediate steps. And these 3 techniques offer you intermediate steps that you can use in your daily work. So these are the techniques that I'm proposing to you, but in general, remember, before thinking of solutions, spend a little bit more on the problem. Try to understand what exactly are you trying to solve. As technologists, we like to jump into the technology side of the things. But before that, let's see, it's an art form to figure out what's the minimum technology to use when dealing with a problem. Can we solve that problem with less technology? Can we solve that problem with less custom code? That's always a good thing to consider, because it will reduce some of your issues with maintaining software in the long term. So another option actually is to go to code retreats, because code retreats force you to understand the problem through repetition. A code retreat is a one-day event where you have a single problem that you work on throughout the day for 45-minute sessions, and after each 45-minute session you delete all the code. So this makes you, after 2 or 3 sessions, understand what is the problem actually, and get a better understanding of the problem. And there's much more to talk about when we talk about code retreats, but this is one of the effects that I have seen in these types of events. So that's it. I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. We have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm, so please like, share, subscribe, tell other people about this channel and about these videos. Don't hesitate to comment, to write questions, to suggest topics, to suggest people that we should talk to, that you'd find interesting. Thank you so much, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.